Welcome everyone. I'm Liam. I'm from VantagePoint. This is really our webinar today. We've teamed up with IASeminars to bring you something really interesting on ESG and getting started on your ESG journey and taking the necessary steps towards ESG success. So we've partnered with IASeminars to bring you all of the knowledge and expertise that they have through their ESG training and enablement offerings. And we're pairing up with them to also bring you all the technology and transformation knowledge that you're going to need when it comes to your ESG journey. So today we're going to touch on a couple of different things, but really this is all about pairing up and giving you the knowledge of IASeminars and actually the subject matter expertise from Kate Daniels, who joins us from IASeminars. I'll let Kate introduce herself in a second, and also our advisory director, Jamie Benaran from VantagePoint. As VantagePoint, we specialize in helping you go on the journey from, let's say, the disconnected world of lots of data everywhere, lots of work done in spreadsheets, and maybe struggles to become compliant with standards like ESG, to a connected world where things like ESG success are much easier. Just some general housekeeping before we get started. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section where you can add any question you want. In these webinars, we have really good success in terms of engagement, so let's please keep that going today. Add as many questions as you want. We'll try to get to them all before the end of our discussion. We'll even have a Q&A section in the end. There's also a chat function where you can speak to the people involved in the webinar today if you did want to put in anything that maybe wasn't a more direct question. With that, I think, Kate, over to you to get started. Just one more housekeeping point as well, while I remember, we will have polls today, and in order to take advantage of your CPE credits, you will need to participate in that flash up on your screen throughout this webinar. Great, I think that's everything. So with that, Kate, I'll pass over to you and we can get started.
Thank you, Liam. And just also to introduce IASeminars, we have recently celebrated our 20-year anniversary and our birthday. IASeminars was founded in the UK, but today has a global footprint in multiple countries and, of course, a global faculty base. Whereas we got our beginning in offering financial training and accounting training and kind of the classical financial fields, in the last few years, we've been asked more and more to offer ESG training and to start to articulate and explore the interaction between finance and ESG as more reporting requirements are placed, certainly already in the European markets, and there are requirements forthcoming in North America. So IASeminars is very excited to partner up with VantagePoint, both to deliver this series of webinars on ESG and also to deliver the concept of ESG labs, which we'll be talking about in more detail later in the session. So I will kick off the deck. And as Liam mentioned, Jamie and myself will be enjoying kind of a panel discussion, a fireside chat later in the session. But first, I'll give a brief talk on the 5 steps to establish your ESG management strategy. And then Jamie will give us some more information on the ESG Labs concept and the design of that methodology. So to start off, as Liam mentioned, if you would like to get CPE credit for this course, please be sure to participate in the polls. The first poll is, actually, let me launch this poll. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Let me know if you can't. What is the status of your ESG plan? My company does not have an ESG plan or any ESG policies. My company has an ESG policy, but nothing else. My company has an ESG policy and management system and is starting to collect data for public disclosure. Or number 4, my company has all of the above and actively pulls on ESG levers to add value to the business in an empirical way. So I'll give you all a few more moments to cast your votes. And whatever is the most close to true, really, we're just trying to get a read from the audience on sort of where you are in your journey. Okay, I'm going to leave it up for maybe 2 more seconds. And I will end the poll in 3, 2, One. Great. So we're all sort of in the middle there. I mean, it sounds like there's been some work, there's been some thinking for most of you in many of your companies, but this feels like it's a good time to participate in a webinar like this and to start engaging with what does the future of our ESG management system look like. Thank you for participating. And close that out. Okay. Before I get into the 5 steps, we thought it would be useful to once again level set our understanding of ESG in the context that we're speaking about it in today. Certainly in North America, it's become of late quite a politicized hot button topic, which is curious to those of us who work in the space because in fact, ESG represents more material information with which to evaluate companies and investment portfolios. Full stop. I think we can all agree that in the course of deploying capital, more material information is generally better. And so that is what ESG and the field of ESG is meant to contribute, is additional material, germane information on a company or a portfolio that can guide decision-making, especially investment decision-making. So definitionally, what do we mean when we talk about the E, the S, and the G? The E refers to environmental and involves the entire physical environment of a company and its ecosystem of operations. It includes your greenhouse gas emissions, your scope 1 and 2 and 3. It includes all resource use, so not just energy, but also water and land use. It involves waste management and recycling. It involves animal welfare and conservation, and in some ways also involves the supply chain. So how are you ensuring that your supply chain is as devoid of unnecessary pollution as possible? And how do you track that? The social refers to your impact on humanity and humanity's impact on the company. So remember that for all of these, the E, the S, and the G, the relationship is bidirectional. So it's both the impact that the company is having from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, but it's also the way that the company is impacted by its ecosystem of E, S, and G. So the social involves your impact on humanity. What does that mean? It means your staff complement, right? So anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to pay equity, to health and safety and human rights. These are all components of how you think about and how you care for your staff. But it's beyond that. It's also about thinking of your customer. So in what way is your customer experiencing your good or service? And in what way have you woven the customer consciousness into the design of your good or service? And finally, for those of us who work in companies that are lower impact, meaning financial services or insurance or banking, the S is going to be more limited to our staff and to our customers, but certainly companies that have a large land footprint, like companies in the oil and gas or mining or agriculture or forestry ecosystems, will have as one of their stakeholders and as part of their S impact, the communities that surround their operations. When I was working in East African forestry, I can tell you right now that the communities surrounding our plantations were the most important stakeholder. And certainly in many 21st century large land holding operations, the communities that surround your operations will be your largest asset or your largest liability, depending on how you treat them and how you engage them. So the S is certainly one that is harder to nail down. It's harder to measure, but I think that it's inarguable that one's relationships with communities around an asset absolutely have a knock-on effect on the value of that asset. And so the attempt to start to quantify and talk about the social impact on a company is the job of people like myself, and certainly the focus of all of us, especially as we get more serious about tracking, monitoring, measuring, and reporting on the environmental components of a business. Finally, governance. Governance is often held under the banner of your general counsel or your legal department in a company, but fundamentally, governance has everything to do with the integrity of the company. What is your board structure like? How are you composed? What are your compensation policies? In what ways do shareholders engage with the company? Do you have policies and procedures around bribery and corruption? How do you ensure that the story of your company and the sort of value system of your company is woven throughout not just what you say publicly, but how you operate internally? So now that we've level set our definitions of ESG, I'll move on to the 5 steps to creating your ESG management strategy. In kind of compiling this list, there's a myriad of things to do when you are embarking on your ESG journey, but certainly these 5, in my view, represent the lion's share of where your focus and your energy and your intent should be. Firstly, we'll talk about setting strategy versus tactics and the differences between them and how they show up in ESG. Next, we'll talk about stakeholder engagement and the importance of that process and how that process feeds all of the other steps. We'll talk about a materiality assessment, which we went deeper into in an earlier webinar, but which is a critical piece of establishing what your company is going to disclose. Then we'll talk a little bit about data management and how do you start collecting, managing, monitoring, and publicly disclosing the data that is most germane to your company. And then finally, we'll talk about reporting and communications. So how do we then consolidate the story of our company in a way that is both empirically accurate, but also enjoyable and allows us to tell a compelling story to our stakeholder community. One of the most important things I took away from sort of my early years in business, and definitely in business school, was the difference between strategy and tactics. I hear so often, and it becomes a bit of a bugbear for me, that people will talk about the strategy they're going to employ to do something which is actually very tactical. Often we assign the word strategy to make what we're doing sound really important, when really what we're talking about is tactics. We're talking about actions. We're talking about verbs. And so the difference here is important as you think about how ESG will be both a guiding force and a differentiator for your company, as well as how do you then roll that out? How do you then deploy your strategy in a way that is actionable and repeatable? So your strategy is your vision. It's what differentiates you. It's what makes you special. It's the large scale picture. It's the why. It's why are you doing what you're doing? In what ways is your company deploying an ESG system that's in alignment with its core values and the company's kind of mandate to exist? It's difficult to copy because it's so based on not only your vertical, your ecosystem of interest, but also the people at the helm of your company. And of course, it's got a long time frame, right? Strategies are only evaluated, in the 5 to 10 to 20 year increments. The strategy takes a while to manifest. Whereas the tactics, now by contrast, are that which you do. It's the how, it's the action words, it's the verbs. So in what ways do we make our strategy come to life? We do so through tactics. So it's the doing actions. They're smaller scale. They're easier to copy and replicate because they're basic and they're short-sighted or short time framed rather. So both are critical, but it's important when you're designing your ESG platform and your ESG story to differentiate what about your story is long-term, unique to your company, and a differentiator versus what are the things you will do to realize that strategy. So that's step 1. Step 2 has to do with stakeholder engagement. We talked a lot in the S definition of the people that are involved in your company. And your stakeholder community will be very driven by the type of company you are, where you operate, who's at the helm. But your stakeholder community involves everyone from your staff and your suppliers and your contractors to the communities that surround your operations, to your shareholders, to your private investors, to your customers, right? So your stakeholder community is all individuals and communities who are impacted by or who impact your company. So in engaging in stakeholder engagement, firstly, and there are various models and systems and tools out there for you to use. We have many. So always feel free to reach out to us at IASeminars and VantagePoint, because we can certainly equip you with the right templates to use. But firstly, you'll want to do a stakeholder engagement and stakeholder mapping exercise, which is where you name the full community of stakeholders in your company and start to evaluate both their level of influence and their specific areas of interest. The things that your communities around your operations care about and will want to hear about regularly may be different from what your staff wants to hear about on a quarterly basis. It may be different from what you put in your investor reports on a quarterly basis. So naming those differences and calling them out and mapping them are an important part of getting this right. Next, you'll design a communication plan, which basically outlines the extent to which and the frequency of your communications with your stakeholder communities. So you'll name the fact that you will be responsible for an annual report to your shareholders or a quarterly report to your shareholders, or you will engage in biannual meetings with the communities that surround your operations for a consultative process of sharing what the company plans are and hearing from communities. Which takes us into the consultation phase. Consultation is really bidirectional, right? The idea with stakeholder engagement is that you are both telling and you are listening. You are soliciting information and feedback from your stakeholder community on how you're doing. Critically, we want to keep it simple, right? Let's not overcomplicate things to make ourselves seem to be doing something more grand than it is. This is effectively engaging in a conversation, a thoughtful, intentional conversation with the various communities that have an impact or are impacted by our company, which means that listening is an important part of it, right? And that's a key component of the consultation process. It's both sharing and it's hearing. Use this stakeholder engagement process to manage your risks, right? You'll learn more than you ever anticipate from your stakeholder community around what are the risks facing your company. By engaging with communities, you'll learn about pockets of despair or pockets of resistance. By engaging your shareholders and investors, you'll learn about forthcoming public disclosure requirements. You'll learn about the tools and metrics and standards that are most important to your investor community, which effectively will guide your reporting. Use this process to seek consensus. Use this process to create win-win strategies and systems of engagement with your communities. And then use it to define your KPIs. A key piece of this is saying what you will do and then honoring that promise, right? So much of how we generate trust with our stakeholders is simply identifying that which we will do and then doing it, honoring the promise that we've made. So that's a little bit around stakeholder engagement. Okay, and now I will stop the flow of the delivery of these steps just to bring to you our second poll. And okay, poll number 2. Hopefully everyone can see that. The thing that confuses me the most about ESG is how to measure scope 1, 2, and 3, how to figure out who my stakeholders are, how to conduct a materiality assessment, how to capture and report the right data, or how to author an ESG or sustainability report. This is really helpful feedback. So please do engage with this question, because so much of our desire to generate responses will also guide our future programming. So the more we learn from you about what's confusing or mystifying, the better enabled we are to create content for you in the future that's appropriate and answers your needs. So I see votes are still coming in. I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close out the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, it looks like by a slim margin that capturing and reporting on the right data is the most sort of mystifying and confusing piece, which is auspicious that we are partnering with VantagePoint, who specialize in ESG data. So this is very helpful for us, because certainly we'll be talking more about this point later on. But also this issue of conducting a materiality assessment, I've seen that to be a confusing piece to lots of companies. And the beauty is, part of how we are designing the ESG Labs concept between IASeminars and VantagePoint involves a deep dive into materiality assessment, and how do you establish and decide and get serious about that which is most germane to your company. So thank you for participating, and I'll close that out. Okay, taking us to step 3, to materiality assessment. And again, this is going to be a very brief description, but please do go back to our webinar series from 2022, when we did a 3-part series, and the second of those was a deep dive into materiality. How do you establish materiality? How do you conduct a materiality assessment? And how is it discussed and defined by various different standard setters like GRI and SASB? But this is an example I pulled from Danone. I found it to be a really healthy example of what the final result of a materiality assessment looks like. But effectively, conducting a materiality assessment is kind of like conducting a workshop on what matters most to your company. What are the areas in your ecosystem? What are the issues that are going to impact the company's financial and reputational performance the most? And also, what impacts by the company are going to be most germane to your community of stakeholders, right? So again, it's bi-directional. It's what matters most to us, and what about what we're doing will matter most to our stakeholders. So what I appreciate about the final result of the Danone materiality assessment is that not only have they mapped their materiality issues according to that which is most material at the top right-hand corner, to the kind of medium materiality importance, to the lesser materiality importance. Now, I'll say that an assessment like this would have had hundreds of issues that would have been identified during the workshop, and that these issues that have made their way to the mapping are all of various levels of importance. So they're all going to be monitored and managed, but those at the top right-hand corner are going to make it to, the top 10 risk register, for example. So you then map your material topics against the impact on the business success, so their impact on how well you will do as a business, versus their importance to your external stakeholders. So this is where you've woven in the stakeholder engagement piece to inform your materiality assessment. What I also appreciate about the way Danone did this is they used color coding to indicate which issues are of a health and nutrition variety, or which are to do with the planet, which are to do with governance and business, and then which issues have to do with the social or the supply chain or the kind of human impact. Also, they've used sizing, which I think is helpful to indicate issues of more importance, or certainly issues that are likely to become more important in the future. So again, we could give a day or more long workshop just on materiality, but the point of the materiality assessment is for company leadership. By the way, this is not done just in a sequestered room by the ESG team. This is a process that is undertaken by company leadership to identify the most material, the most germane issues to a company, and to map those in terms of their importance to both the company's success and to your stakeholder community. So that's a bit about materiality. And then step 4 has to do with data management, which many of you said is the most confusing part of the ESG journey. And I get it. I feel the same way, which is why it's so comforting to be partnering with VantagePoint, who specialize in this area. We hear a lot these days in kind of the common technology lexicon around digital transformation, right? No longer are we in an era of analog operations and analog data management. We are in fact bringing our data into the digital era. And what does that mean? It means there's the automation of our data. It means that there's less human input, so there's less room for error. There's more integration between different parts of our data universe. So often, when we're working with companies, we hear that they will be managing their finances in one system over here, and they're managing their supply chain in another system over there, and they're managing their inventory in yet another system, and their project management is done somewhere else. And while that can work for companies for a time, there is an imperative and certainly a deep benefit to be derived from marrying all of these types of data and to consolidating your data into an enterprise resource planning or an ERP system, for example. So the idea here is that you start with data. You start with, what is the company doing? What kinds of emissions are we measuring and reporting? What does our waste management look like? How much energy do we use? What is our staff complement? What is our relationship between men and women? What are we paying for salaries? These are all pieces of data that tell a story about a company. Then, if you can kind of weave that data together in a way that honors the paradigm of people, process, and technology. If you can ensure that first you've taken into account the people and ensure that there's a culture of reporting where individuals know why they're collecting data and they see and experience the value of that data. If that then flows into workflows that allow for consistency and repeatability, and then if you ensure that all of that is collected in some kind of system of record, like an ERP system, which allows you to take a snapshot of the company at any given time, then what you will derive is high quality information that supports decision-making in two important ways. And I would argue that these are equally important. We manage data not just because we want to report to our shareholders at the end of the day. That's an important result, but the other thing we do it for is to manage ourselves, to take day-to-day management decisions based on the data we're collecting and what it's telling us. So if we're able to honor this system, then we're able to both report to our shareholders and investor community, but also take management decisions in a more day-to-day fashion that are empirical and based on something real and verifiable in our systems. So I wanted to quickly just stop there and see, Jamie, if you had anything to add to the data piece.
No, I mean, I think that's a great introduction to data management, Kate. I'd only add to that the data management for ESG reporting is going to be somewhat similar to general data management and data strategizing in business that should already be in existence. In terms of kind of, I guess the first major step is identifying the data, and I think to Kate's point, the materiality assessment piece is going to be critical to that, both kind of from an internal introspection as to kind of what the company deems to be important as a priority to measure, what the communities, investors, other stakeholders deem important, and of course, top-down regulators, that will be on people's mind as well. But identifying that data is the most important part. And then, as you would do for any other regulation or any other requirement for reporting, it's things like good practices like establishing data collection processes, ensuring that your data is accurate, that it's complete as required. Some of the principles that Kate mentioned there around keeping data in one single source of truth is absolutely going to make reporting a lot easier, as opposed to patchworking many different systems together. Data security is also a factor to consider as well. But I think, yeah, more than happy to answer some more specific questions around data and data management in the Q&A we've got a little bit later, but I think that's a great intro so far, Kate.
Thank you. Yeah, and then finally, I'll just kind of take us over to step 5, which is reporting and communications. I'm conscious of time, and I want to get us over to Jamie's conversation on ESG labs quickly. So effectively, what this piece is around is how are we, well, let's say it this way. There are some principles to be observed if you want to get reporting and communications right. Firstly, assigning the right team and the right skill sets to this discipline is critical. I can't tell you how many companies I've talked to who say, yeah, we understand that ESG is coming as a regulatory hurdle, and we're going to assign someone from marketing to do that, or we're going to assign someone from HR to handle that. When really, you know, ESG is a full-time job in and of itself, and it is indeed a multidisciplinary position or set of positions, and is deserving of its own kind of allocation of financial and human resource capacity. Next, make sure that you are ensuring bi-directional communication in your reporting process. So reporting requirements will come down from on high, but there must be a mechanism to ensure that those collecting data can also offer feedback to those who set the standards around what's working and what's not, whether certain questions are landing the way you want them to, whether the questions as they are worded are generating the kind of information we need to generate. We also need to make sure that there's an outside in and an inside out component. So much of your reporting is both reflecting what's going on internally, but also with a constant eye toward your external environment. What are regulators starting to ask for, and what's coming down the pike as far as requirements for disclosures in the future. Prioritizing performance through technology, making sure that you're integrating systems, you're integrating your environmental data management systems with your finance systems so that you can tell a holistic and compelling story about your company. And finally, ensuring that you are collaborating with like-sized, like-oriented companies in your vertical will behoove you, and will also ensure that your reporting is reflective of not only what you've deemed important, but what your peers in the community have deemed is important. So with that, that's kind of closing up the 5 steps. And now I'm going to hand over to Jamie to talk to us a little bit about the ESG Labs concept, which we are designing together now.
Perfect. Thanks, Kate. That was great. So ESG Labs, what is it? So it's an evolution really of our successful CFO Labs concept that we already use with many of our clients to kickstart finance transformation with finance leaders. However, there's obviously more of a specific focus on ESG. In a nutshell, it's a one-day accelerator workshop for people wanting to take that first step on their ESG journey. And it was really born out of kind of one thing, and that's the increasing ask from our clients and people that we're speaking to who are needing to or wanting to become ESG compliant and really start to differentiate themselves as a business based on their ESG credentials. We wanted to create a way for accessible engagement to experts in ESG and finance transformation field, and so that's why we partnered with IASeminars on this concept, so that we can help businesses understand kind of how to take that first step towards compliance and reporting. The main outcome of the one-day event is to produce a high-level transformation roadmap that encompasses people, process, and technology change for the next 12, 18, 24 months. But there's a number of activities or a number of things that we do to produce that along the way. The first is kind of level setting everyone's understanding of ESG, which is going to be really important. The other is understanding the art of the possible with regards to kind of how businesses want to invest and which areas they want to invest the most in across ESG. And that's everything from kind of understanding policies, procedures, operations, monitoring and evaluation, technology implementation and facilitation of ESG compliance through tech, governance reporting, transparency, risk and value management, etc. And really it's an opportunity to bring groups of people within businesses onto the same page and with regards to kind of what ESG means. So I guess just to go, I think I've probably covered those objectives. If I flip over to the next slide, Kate. So what does that sort of break down into? And I guess before I do that, what are some of the key inputs for the day? So similar to our CFO Labs concept, which maybe some of our listeners have been involved in to date, we send out a capability survey that kind of breaks ESG down into a number of sort of level 1 and level 2 capabilities that is everything that one needs to think about when embarking on and delivering a successful ESG transformation. And for us, that gives us a really quick and quite deep and meaningful insight into how a business is operating and able to achieve ESG compliance from a people, process, and technology perspective. We also, as a major input, kind of do some background research on the business, so things like business strategy, finance strategy, any ESG strategy that might be there to date is a really critical input as well. And something that we bring ourselves, and we've developed some sort of really interesting thought leadership that Kate and I have been working on, is around the future of ESG trends. And really that's a major part of the day, is helping to elevate people's understanding of what ESG is and what it could mean as well, should there be a desire to want to invest and apply effort to that journey. We break the day down into 3 sections: imagine, review, and plan. And to my point earlier, Imagine is really about bringing people's heads up and being able to set an ESG vision. It may not mean that you want to move as to the far right as possible, of kind of in terms of what is potentially possible in the ESG compliance and transformation space, but knowing what that looks like will help you develop that kind of North Star. And that's kind of the first part of the day. The second part of the day is diving into detail into the results of the ESG capability survey that we've sent out prior. And for us, that should be highlighting areas of a business or within finance or operations that means that we can have some more insightful conversations on the day. So where that survey highlights potential challenges or pain points, we'll be ensuring that we focus for a few hours on those within the day. And the final part of the day is all around planning, and it's kind of working towards that major output, which is that transformation roadmap that we provide back to people who are part of ESG labs, and for them, they're able to take that on and own transformation of that, or indeed look to take on support to deliver that people, process, and technology transformation. And finally, just a quick sort of summary of outputs and outcomes. So there on the left, things like your ESG vision, understanding how well you're performing from an ESG compliance and transformation perspective, and obviously a transformation roadmap, and really key outcomes that are somewhat similar to our CFO Labs concept around alignment on what ESG is, but also kind of vision, objectives, and priorities. Clarity on what the projects and programs will need to look like over the course of the next few months, year, 2 years, and the ability to kind of go from ideation, strategy, all the way through to a degree of tactical, right, we know what we need to do, able to take that away and start to enact it in real time. So that was a very quick introduction to ESG Labs. Thank you, Kate, for the opportunity to share a little bit more. I think we might have one more poll before we jump into the fireside style Q&A with Liam.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. And yeah, we'll just run through this one quickly and jump into our Q&A. I'm most interested to dive deeper into strategy and tactics, stakeholder engagement, materiality assessment, data management, or reporting and communications. So this will also guide future content and future webinars and how we constitute ourselves in the future. So I'll give you all a few more seconds to make your votes. Okay, I'll close it out in 3, 2, 1. Great. Okay. So our focus in the future needs to be around materiality assessments, which is great because we are currently offering courses on doing materiality assessments using SASB and GRI with IASeminars. Also, incidentally, we are offering a 5-day course, which will include all of this and more in London in June, from the 12th of June. So please do sign up for that course early to get in on that. And then also data management, reporting and communications, and to some extent, strategy and tactics are areas of interest. Thank you all for your participation. And now we will break off into our fireside chat facilitated by Liam.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate and Jamie. That's really good. And thank you for everyone that's adding questions. That's really helpful. We will get to the majority of them. Maybe I guess just for me to start and give you some questions that we've prepared ahead of time and we've had from some others as well. I guess aside, Kate, from compliance and reporting, how can ESG help or benefit my organization? I think it's a question that comes up a lot when we speak to clients around what's the value of ESG. It'd be really good to hear that from you.
Thank you. Yeah, I love to talk about value creation from ESG because so often ESG is kind of couched in this conversation around risk and around compliance, which just isn't very exciting and isn't very motivating. When really, in my experience over the last 15 years, I've watched ESG be the driver of capital raising. I've watched ESG attract young talent and kind of passionate skill sets. I've watched ESG form one of the most powerful risk mitigation and reputation enhancing aspects of a company. So to kind of give you a direct answer, ESG adds value to a company. Yes, firstly, from the compliance and regulator standpoint, absolutely. But beyond that, having a strong ESG profile allows you to attract young, passionate, concerted talent. We know that Gen Z is a community of young people who are making intentional choices about where they work and making sure that their value systems are in alignment with their employers. So that's a piece. But the other one that I've seen quite dramatically affect companies is the ability to leverage your ESG performance to raise capital. We know that more and more assets under management are being directed toward funds and portfolio companies with a strong ESG record. So it becomes a differentiator for a company that's on the raise, out to raise capital. But it also becomes a differentiator for public companies that are more and more going to be asked to publicly disclose ESG disclosures in the course of their reporting to shareholders and other investors. So those are just a few ways I've seen ESG add value.
Excellent. And I guess today is all about us showing the steps towards, deriving value from ESG. I think there are some really good ways you can do so. Maybe just in terms of, I guess there's a lot of confusion, and I think Jamie, Kate, you can both weigh in on this, but there's a lot of confusion about who owns ESG, and I think finance leaders are coming more and more into the frame. And why should ESG matter to finance leaders?
Yeah, Jamie, do you want to take a crack at it first?
I think it comes down to, sure, I will hand over to you, Kate, to fill in. I think it comes down to the fact, it comes down to, I think, the things we've already mentioned here is that ESG isn't just something that should be seen as a top-down, you need to be reporting this in this way at this time, which in reality is probably what many regulations to many sectors are typically viewed as, and certainly have been viewed as. There is genuinely a lot of sort of discourse and excitement around the possibility of ESG kind of discourse and it being part of the zeitgeist to add to the bottom line of a business, to genuinely attract perhaps new customers, opportunities to develop new products. And if that's a CFO or someone within the finance space who might not typically be involved in sort of change instigation and driving the business forward in that space, I think it's a very exciting opportunity, and one that I'm really keen to help many of our finance leaders take forward.
Yeah, I would add as well that, we are all used to an annual financial audit, right? There's this kind of appreciation for the need to audit our financial information, but there's also this concept for ESG information of assurance, which is the same thing. If you are on an annual basis exposing your company to an annual financial audit, you will very soon be asked to ensure that your ESG disclosures are assured, which is effectively a third-party auditing process on your ESG disclosures. So I would say that the rigor of your reporting and the rigor and transparency of the information you're putting out there has to be on par with your financial information. So that's relevant to finance leaders because so much of this information will be integrated when it's delivered publicly. And that's also sort of a trend that we're moving away from a context of your annual financials in one place and your annual ESG report in another, more toward a condition of constant integrated annual reporting that tells a whole story about not just the financial implications of your company, but how those financial pieces interact with your ESG performance.
Fantastic. I think, as I said, the webinar today and the whole idea of ESG Labs is either to pick up when you're partway on your journey and get you to the next stage, or maybe if you're just starting out, it's a really good way to take that first step and combine lots of knowledge from IA with, I guess, our ambition and ability to get you actually started on your ESG journey. So I guess just one thing maybe to take a step back from that, but let's say someone isn't ready for ESG Labs or don't feel they are, where can they get, more training, enablement, information on that mandatory ESG reporting, voluntary ESG reporting, and maybe updates to the ESG regulatory environment? Let's say, maybe Kate, that's probably more directed at you.
Yeah, well, today's session is very high level and meant to sort of whet the appetite. At IASeminars, we offer a wealth of different types of ESG courses that are much more technical and much more specific. So we are offering everything from the 5-day course, which is a comprehensive ESG course, which will involve strategy and tactics. It'll involve using ESG as a lever to raise capital. It'll involve storytelling around ESG reporting, but it'll also involve the regulatory requirements for ESG reporters, both in Europe and in North America. So there's that, which is, a 5-day investment. But then there are also virtual courses we offer all the time and in person on deploying a materiality assessment within your company according to the SASB regulations, or ESG reporting using Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. We have some courses now on the S, focusing on the S in ESG. We have courses focusing on the G. We have courses that focus on the regulatory requirements in Europe as standalone courses, and soon, once the SEC has delivered its mandate and its required disclosures for public companies in North America, we'll be delivering courses on that as well. So if you're curious, but perhaps not yet ready to commit your company to an ESG Labs experience, I would highly recommend signing up for some of those public courses, or get in touch with us and we can design a bespoke course for your company as kind of an internal event that allows it to be very much a focus on your company, your vertical, your environment.
Excellent. I think given the volume of questions and engagement we've actually had, I think we better start to get through some of these. Just for the people that have put in the questions, I think some of them will need a little bit of clarification. So I may ask you to clarify. So just go back and read your question and you'll recognize it as I call it out. One of those, but I guess Jamie and Kate, you can have a go at answering this. It'd be, could you also share some tips for establishing a business's digital proposition on ESG? Obviously, that's quite a big one. Not 100% sure what you mean by that. If you could add some more detail, that would be great. But maybe Jamie, Kate, I'll throw that over to you to give an idea there. Of what you'd recommend when it comes to establishing a business's digital proposition for ESG.
Okay, I mean that question could mean different things to different people. Before I have a go at a stab at answering that, Kate, is that something that you want to do, or shall I?
I just have a very tactical response, which is something I saw this week. So I'll kick it off with that, and then keen to hear what you think, Jamie. But
Yep.
When we talk about digital versus analog, what do we mean actually? An analog system is where I have a sheet of paper into which I am recording information, and I am keeping it perhaps in a physical file, in a filing cabinet, in an office. And let's be honest, a lot of companies still manage their data in that way, and there's nothing shameful there. It's just a step in the evolution of digital transformation, and that's step one. And I would say as companies digitize, what that means is you're taking your data into an environment where it lives in the cloud, it is automatically updated, and there is as little human interaction or interface with the updating of data as possible. So just this week, I saw a demonstration of a product called Carbon Suite, which is integrated with NetSuite as an ERP system and allows a company to track its scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions by virtue of the expenses that already live in its financial management system, right? So if you've bought a plane ticket and you're recording that in your financial management system, there is now an add-on that will allow you to extract your greenhouse gas emissions from that trip, and that goes into what will become your report on scope 1, 2, and 3. So there's beautiful products and services emerging that allow companies to digitize management of their ESG data and disclosures.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great answer. Probably the same tack that I would have taken as well. So when people say digital, it really can mean different things to different people. I know it was a big buzzword in the last sort of 5-10 years, but from I guess my perspective, I guess maybe to take a more sort of structured approach to how we might practically kind of solve for digital transformation underpinning ESG compliance and reporting, etc. It would, I mean, we typically, when we're coming into businesses to review kind of how well technology satisfies needs and musts and activities within a business, we take a capability-led view. So we understand from a capability perspective, what do you need to be doing? And capabilities are a combination of people, process, and technology. And within a day, if we're talking about an ESG labs concept, we don't have an opportunity to dive right into detail for kind of systems architecture that underpins ESG data collection, monitoring, reporting. But I think taking that structured approach of capability by capability, how do people, process, systems enable that capability to be good or great, and developing as well the kind of finance systems architecture. I think between the two, that's the kind of starter for 10 to be able to then understand, right, what do we need to digitize? And by digitize, you mean, you know, improve from a technical perspective, automate, etc., to enable great ESG.
Okay, great. I think this question is slightly more, it should be quick. So I think if one of us can take this, that would be great. So, and it was really just very specific on ESG labs. And it's, can you tailor a day to a senior leadership team that has no idea about ESG? So starting at, I guess, with a senior leadership team that are maybe not as clued up as they might want to be in ESG, could we tailor a day to somebody like that?
I mean, Kate, feel free to take this one, but I think that's exactly what we were discussing. As Kate mentioned, it's kind of in a stage at the moment of we've almost completed the kind of ESG workshop agenda, but one of the big adaptations that we've made to it in the last couple of weeks is, at the beginning, a huge element of it is level setting understanding of what ESG is. We want to make sure that we're as sort of action or outcome orientated as possible. So working towards, well, what do we need to do in order to facilitate ESG transformation and compliance ultimately is important. So we want to make sure that we've always got that angle. But I think the education piece is always going to be key, right?
Yep, I agree 100%. And I also would say that we can kind of fashion the ESG labs to the level of participants. So if we're talking to a C-suite audience and we are really commanding the attention of company leadership, we're going to keep the level of discourse at a very high level strategic place so that we're gathering as much information from that level of leader as possible. If we then have an ESG labs in which we've got representation from multiple levels of a company, then what we'll do is plan for some breakouts. We'll plan for some sort of input from the C-suite that is unique to that vantage point and that kind of the air up there, as well as the generating and soliciting input from sort of mid-level management and to those who are executing, because frankly, ESG manifests differently at all levels of a company, and each of those perspectives is quite valuable.
The last thing I'll say is that similarly to our CFO lab workshop, and maybe it's the level of detail that's a bit too much at this point, but we fashion the day around the problem statement. And if the major problem statement for that particular ESG lab is we don't know very much about it, but we want to learn more, then more emphasis will be applied on the education and level setting piece, appropriate to your individual needs. And there'll be a level of engagement that we have prior to the workshop to understand who's in attendance, what people's knowledge and experience is, such that we do tailor the day accordingly.
Okay, brilliant. One more here that I think might be an interesting one is it's basically a question on ESG strategy. So the question is, would an ESG strategy essentially have two parts? One, the strategy, and one with tactics, or would the tactics sit outside the strategy itself?
I would say your ESG strategic plan will be composed of both a couple of large scale statements of intent, vision, direction, which is your strategy, and will include a great deal of tactical delivery pieces. So here's where we're going, here's who we are, and here's our way of being the company we say we are, of honoring the brand promise we're making through our ESG interventions. And then from there, there's kind of the unpacking of what that means and what that looks like in terms of our tactics. So it's for any of you who have created in the past what's called a logical framework or a logic framework, it generally runs in this kind of overarching objective and then inputs, outputs, outcome, and impact, right? This is kind of the flow. And the idea with that is that for any big idea, we then need to break it down into what are we investing from a human and resources perspective? What are the immediate outputs, right? Number of people have trained, number of, I don't know, medications dispensed, right? Very immediate deliverables, those are outputs. Your more medium-term outcomes, which are kind of changes in the condition. And then your longer-term impact, which is fundamentally the realization of your original goal. So I would say that they're not separate from each other. In fact, your tactics are rolling out from your overarching strategies.
Excellent. Okay. I think really clear and concise answer. One more then, and I think then we may need to wrap up. So if we just look at, I think one here, and this might be a pretty quick one for you, Kate. Is compliance ESG a regulatory requirement or a voluntary compliance to adhere to? So where does it land, I think, is the gist of the question.
The answer to that question depends on where you are, meaning where is your company domiciled, and whether you are public or private. So if you are a public company in Europe, you absolutely have required compliance level ESG reporting. And we would need a longer conversation, but we could go into exactly what those reporting requirements are. If you're a private company in Europe, the likely scenario is that your private investors are asking for and or demanding certain types of ESG disclosures, but that will be based on the investor. Currently, if you're a public company in North America or in the US specifically, you are not at this moment required to disclose anything from an ESG perspective, but that will be changing in fiscal year 24. If you're a private company in North America, again, it's all voluntary, but I would argue that those who are on the front foot of ESG disclosures and who are voluntarily adopting standards like the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures are going to be companies that thrive and flourish in the future, because what they're doing already voluntarily is going to soon be mandated.
Excellent. Okay, I think that's really clear, and I think important to get out that nuance based on that. So with 1 minute to go, I think we can wrap there and let everyone finish on time. Kate, Jamie, thank you so much for a fantastic session. Thank you to everybody who joined. Unfortunately, given the sheer volume of people here and all of the questions, we haven't been able to get through them all. A lot of you have asked questions which are quite nuanced. Please reach out to us directly with those. Can't really answer them sufficiently in a webinar like this, so please reach out to us, connect with us on LinkedIn or via our website, and we can absolutely take you through all of those more detailed questions. Again, thank you all very much for joining. This will be shared. A lot of questions around that, so this will be shared with you, and you will be able to rewatch any of the answers from today. We look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. And thank you very much.
Thank you.